welcome to this week's episode of Not D&D, brought to you by EM World Live. I'm your host, Jessica, and this week I am flabbergasted to be joined by Chelsea. Chelsea, thanks so much for joining.
Thanks for having me.
We were also going to have Fleur this week, but fortunately she couldn't make it, but Chelsea will be here to answer any and all of your questions. If you're watching live, please jump into the chat and join in, ask any questions you have. We'll try to answer them. And if you're listening to the podcast, any links to things we talk about will be in the show notes for you to listen to. So Chelsea, obviously we're going to be here talking about Flabbergasted, and congratulations for all any award nominations you had this year. It was for many different things like Product of the Year, Best Game, Best Interior Art. So, congratulations for all those kind of accolades you have for the game already. But before we dig into talking about the game, you're very welcome. Before we dig into talking about the game, I'd love to talk about you a little bit. So what's your first memory that you have talking about role-playing games, or what's the first role-playing game that you remember playing?
The first game I've ever played was about 11, 12 years ago now. I had no idea what tabletop role-playing games were.
Okay.
Neither did my sister, because we actually played the first game together. But we were very into video games. I mean, we still are, but back then it was like our life.
Sure.
Now we have responsibilities and adulthood and gross things.
Yeah, sucks.
So I can't play 24/7. And we were very obsessed with the series Dragon Age. And we just wanted to consume everything that was around that had to do with Dragon Age. And I found this tabletop role-playing game of Dragon Age. They had their own game. And I bought it for my sister for her birthday and thought we'd try it out. I had no idea what it was. The first game was a disaster, but
oh no!
So I got it for my sister and I decided to run the first game.
Sure.
And I didn't do any prep. Didn't read the book because I didn't know what it was. I didn't know you had to read. You had to prepare a session. So there was my sister and two other friends, and I just started reading the book in front of them, and that was the first session.
Okay, great.
So I read all the parts, including the parts you shouldn't say out loud to your players. I just read everything. Horrible. And then I started to learn how you're supposed to do it and how you're supposed to GM. So that was our first game. It was Dragon Age, and then shortly after, like everyone else, we got into Dungeons and Dragons, and we played that for many years. We had some campaigns that lasted for years. And after a few years of that, we started exploring different games. Still quite big games, and then it's kind of like within the last 4 years that we kind of solely play indie tabletop role-playing games now. That's how I got started.
Amazing. I think you're the first person to say Dragon Age actually for their first game, because most people are like, oh, it was D&D or something like that. So it's nice to hear something that was something a little bit different. So that's awesome. Awesome to hear. So like you say, you moved on to kind of more kind of indie tabletop RPGs, because I think Dragon Age is quite a rules heavy sort of game, so not really rules light in the same way Flabbergasted is. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, it's definitely more rules heavy than Flabbergasted, kind of a bit more similar to D&D, and obviously involves combat, which Flabbergasted doesn't involve. So I'd say in the first 5 years of playing tabletop role-playing games, I assumed that tabletop role-playing games had to have combat in some form or other.
Yeah.
So it was a breath of fresh air to finally start playing games without combat. And obviously Flabbergasted it doesn't have one of those. Because combat was always my least favorite part of every tabletop role-playing game.
Okay.
And my favorite part was always the in-between moments, like in D&D, if we would end up infiltrating a ball, or these fun, or even our shopping montages are always really fun. Like in between combat.
Yeah, like the campfire
so
singing.
Very different to Flabbergasted.
Fantastic. Well, what sort of indie games were you playing around this time that kind of inspired Flabbergasted? Like you're saying, games that don't have combat in. What sort of what sort of games kind of inspired you or made you aware that you were allowed to do that, you know?
One of our inspirations, even though it's quite different in terms of mechanics and everything like that, but a few years ago we came across Good Society, the Jane Austen
Yes.
tabletop role-playing game, and that was very us. We're like,
Yeah.
it was such a completely different setting to every other tabletop role-playing game that we ever found. And yeah, I would say that's quite a big inspiration. And we've always been very into period games. But really, our big inspiration for this setting came from a book series and a TV series, which
Oh yeah?
we mention as a huge inspiration for this game, which is the Jeeves and Wooster series by P.G. Wodehouse.
Yeah.
So that's how we came up with the idea. We love the series. We love the idea of having, a kind of a bumbling aristocrat and a more serious staff member behind them pulling all the strings.
Yeah.
And we had the idea, like, we would love to play this as a tabletop role-playing game. And like with all our ideas, the first thing we do is we look it up, see if it exists.
Sure. Yeah.
It didn't exist. And we're like, maybe we have something here. So that was the initial spark.
Where did you go from there? So like you say, you're inspired by other media and you're like, I want to walk around in this world and play in a similar environment. Where did you take it from there?
So one of the first things that I do when I have a new concept is I consume every piece of media that has to do with this setting. So I don't know. So I grew up watching a lot of madcap British comedies like Blackadder, Fawlty Towers, that sort of thing. So watched a lot of that. And one of the pretty early on, we had the idea for the archetypes of this game. It kind of came pretty early on. That actually was the 4 archetypes that are in the final book were actually in the first playtest of this game, so it hasn't changed, which is very strange. Everything else has changed, but that hasn't changed.
Oh yeah, that's the one consistency. Okay, yeah.
It just worked. They're 4 very they're broad enough as archetypes where you can kind of fit in any character you want to create in this setting. Wait, so what was the question? Oh yeah, how did we develop this game?
Yeah, right. Where did you go with the a very broad question, in fairness. Like, I can refine it in a little bit. So to start with, if people haven't heard of Flabbergasted, and it's a fantastic title, by the way, I, as a British person, love it. I was immediately like, amazing. But how do you describe it to people? How do you introduce the game to people that haven't heard of it before?
So Flabbergasted is a narrative-driven and comedic tabletop role-playing game. It's rules light, so it's great for people who are new to the hobby and also seasoned players as well. It is inspired by the 1920s and includes 4 archetypes that you can play in this game, which are the aristocrat, the staff, a well-to-do, and the bohemian. And together you go through lots of hijinks and misadventures and adventures like that. And you also create a social club together, which is a reason for you all to band together. And the social club, when we were developing the game, the social club came a bit later, and that was like the final thing we needed to finish the game. A reason for everyone to band together, and also something that everyone can work towards and develop, because in our game there is a social club sheet and you can all upgrade your social club, and that was something that we realized people really love, is having kind of like in video games when you have your home base and you get to develop your home base, stuff like that. That was a similar concept. So yeah, very improv heavy, very comedic, and with our mechanics we wanted to keep them very light, but provide mechanics that will help people improv. right? So if you're scared of comedy and you're scared of improv, our mechanics should help you out.
Perfect. I mean, well, let's dig into those mechanics and talk about it. So, like you say, the setting, one thing I really loved about it though was that it is very 1920s inspired, and you can see from all the artwork I'm sharing on the screen, and if you're listening to the podcast, the links in the website will take you through to the art so you can have a look. But you mentioned it's kind of an alternate setting of 1920s, so it doesn't have to be historically accurate. So you can include or exclude whatever themes you want to play, whatever kind of characters you wanted to play with that, which I thought was really, really fun. So I wanted to just shout that out to the setting. And obviously people are playing with social class and things like that. So mechanically, why don't we start with talking about, well, should we start with the home base? Because at the beginning of the game, you'd sit down and choose your characters and you'd build your home base together. So let's, as you were talking about that, your social club, or your home base, as the video game term would be. Yeah. How do you make a social club? What's involved in that, and what does it do mechanically in the game?
So social club is mostly there for flavor and for narrative. So once you've all created your characters, you will come together and figure out a reason for you all to be in a social club together. So you're going to come up with the theme, which can be as broad as you like. You know, this isn't, we've created an alternate version of the 1920s, right? So it's not historically accurate. You don't have to come up with a social club where you're middle-aged white men and, you know, drinking whiskey. Do whatever you want. We've had occult clubs, private investigative clubs, tea clubs, whatever you want. You also create, you pick the location for your club. So it can be one of the characters' house or a library, anything that you want within the city that we've created in our game, which is called Peccadillo. Then there's other flavor like the description of your club. You also need to pick a rival club, which is going to inform the director, which is our word for a game master. It's going to inform the director for ideas for episodes throughout the season. So that's rival club is someone that you guys really hate and despise. Maybe they're the antithesis of your club, or you just don't like them. Other flavor. There's a slogan. There's also member roles. So you each decide who is the president, the vice president, the treasurer. The treasurer is actually the person who keeps track of the social club sheet. So there's a bit of a role there.
Okay.
There is the big trouble, which is something that your club is facing. You know, as soon as you've started, there is something that is going to bring you down, and a huge problem. Again, that is something you're going to role play throughout your season. Your season refers to the campaign.
Yeah.
And then there's a section for public challenges. And public challenges are challenges that either you or your rival club issue to each other, and they're tasks, sort of challenges that will basically show who is the better club. Like your rival club might say, who can recruit this high-profile individual the first is the better club, sort of thing.
Okay.
So mostly what the social club sheet is there for is to help the director come up with episode ideas for your season.
So it's a great way to collaborate and tell your director what you want as well. You're like, I want this kind of stuff in the game. So yeah, fab.
And that's, I think, something that's quite unique in Flabbergasted, is that your season is informed by your character sheets and your social club sheet. So in the game, we provide ideas for a season structure, where one episode might be about a character's dilemma, the next one might be about another character's dilemma, and then the one after might be about the social club's big trouble, and then a public challenge. You know, there are lots of episodes that you can do, and then an overarching sort of story throughout your season might be solving the big trouble, right? That's something that's going to take some time to figure out. There are some other things on the sheet as well, like there is renown, how renowned your club is. If you do lots of, if you do lots of scandalous things for your club, you might go down in renown, up in renown. And when you go up, you get new members. When you get new members, you can unlock new rooms for your club, which is in the second sheet on the back. And that is mostly, it's a lot of fun to just add new rooms to your club, and kind of, like we said earlier, everyone enjoys upgrading your home base and adding new rooms and things like that. And that's what it is. But there's also some mechanical additions to those rooms as well. Some rooms unlock more character traits and things like that. I won't go into too much detail, but
sure.
I hope I explained that well.
No, yeah, that's perfect sense. I love how this game, when I was reading through, really felt like a collaborative storytelling game. And like right from the beginning, as you were pointing out, the social club does that because it flags ideas for episodes and troubles, and lets the players really say, hey, this is the kind of story we want to tell, this is the sort of dramas we want to be involved in. So it feels really collaborative and really, really nice for a first time game master to run as a director, because it's kind of plotted out for you in a really nice way. And you mentioned how the character sheets do that as well. So obviously there's a few things on the character sheet there, but if we could kind of go over the main broad strokes about characters. You've already mentioned your protagonists have different archetypes, so you'd pick an archetype that you have, but there's lots of things like the status, and I think lucky coin's really fun if you could share that as well, and a few other things on the character sheet would be great.
So I mentioned earlier the 4 archetypes, so maybe I can go into what those are.
Sure.
So there are 4 archetypes that you can choose from. The aristocrat is kind of your duke, your duchess, count, countess. They have a title. Then you have a staff member. So it could be a staff member of the aristocrat, maybe someone in their household. Can be anything from a lady's maid to a gardener, chauffeur, whatever you'd like. Then there's the well-to-do, which is the professional, like a doctor, architect, anything like that. And lastly, you have the bohemian, who are your sensitive artists, right? So poets, poets, whatever you want, dancer, painter, things like that. And you pick one of the archetypes, and on your character sheet, there's a lot of, usual things of things like your relationship, age, stuff like that. Every character also has a flaw, which is, we like our characters to be flawed in this game. The background, everyone has a dilemma. So again, another issue that you're facing. Maybe, I don't know, you have a jilted lover who's trying to get back at you. And then there are a few mechanical things that are unique to this game. Well, firstly, this is going to be quite normal for people. There are character traits, so certain roles require you to roll for a character trait, and this is just a regular dice pool system where a 5 and a 6 is a success. And the more points you have within a character trait, the more d6s that you roll. Then we have a pretty unique mechanic, which is the core of this game, which are the scene cues. Every archetype has, I believe, about 15 scene cues, unique scene cues. And these are narrative abilities. So you can influence a scene to fit your scene cue. They don't require a roll. You just use up one of your uses of your scene cue and you do it. Like, for example, the aristocrat has a scene cue called Don't You Know Who I Am? Where you can, name drop to change a scene to kind of influence it to go your own way. And they're very fun. And this is kind of the core mechanic that allows people to, if they're not confident in improv, they can use the scene cues to inspire them to roleplay. That's what's really fun about them. Most scene cues, you can kind of find ways to fit them into a scene. They're open enough where you can do that. Another small mechanic that you mentioned, the lucky coin, that is there to encourage roleplay and improv. So as a director, if one of the protagonists is just role-playing phenomenally, or maybe they're just hilarious and they said something really witty, you can give them a lucky coin. And the lucky coin can be used throughout your game. If you've failed a character trait roll, you can flip your lucky coin, call heads and tails, and if you called correctly, you succeed that character trait roll. So it's just a little extra mechanic that promotes roleplay.
Yeah, I thought it was really fun when I just saw it on there. I just thought the naming of it and the whole mechanic of it jumped out at me as just a really fun thing. So I wanted to shout it out on there. With the scene cues, how did you come up kind of with the idea of them, or how did that evolve during playtesting?
Scene cues were pretty early on. We had the idea for it. Again, we want to create an improv heavy and comedic game, and we wanted to provide structure for it because it can be quite difficult, especially for people who are used to games like DnD and aren't used to comedy especially. I don't really know exactly where it came from. I guess we've played lots of games that had, abilities or moves, right? And for example, in playbooks, you might have moves that are usually quite mechanical. And we had this idea of what instead of mechanical, they were narrative. Basically, that's the main idea. As to how they developed, I mean, that was many months to come up with. And immediately I regretted choosing, I think it's 15 for every archetype.
I was about to say, because that's a lot of,
But it's a good amount. Like, I really feel like there's such a variety, and I like that there are 15 for every archetype. There are some scene cues that are the same in every archetype as well, a few. Like, there's a flirting one that is in every single archetype, because every archetype can shamelessly flirt to get their way.
Well, of course, it's the roaring 1920s. That's what the time's about. You talked a little bit about, people that are perhaps used to playing something like D&D and approaching a narrative game. If you're used to games evolving around combat, which a lot of role-playing games do, and then you come to this game, what can people expect to kind of, have the game be about? You've mentioned before that there's a kind of a structure where you have the season is your campaign, like the whole kind of campaign. Each episode you can structure in a certain way, but what would people be doing in these episodes if not doing a combat? Because that's usually most role-playing games is you do some little fights and fight the big bad, but that's going to be a bit different here.
So I've mentioned this earlier, but essentially you're going to be doing like wacky hijinks, in short. But for example, I don't know, I've had a one shot where it was where we had like a cross country race, but then on the way things went wrong, and then they ended up going in a hot air balloon, and then they ended up attending a party at some point, and it's just anything that you guys, the players, can come up with can happen. Like, there's no limits really. But the scene cues will definitely give you ideas on how to move the story forward. The director is obviously going to be there to direct everyone forward, and a concept that we mentioned in the game, it's an improv concept, which is the idea of failing forward. So when you're playing, it's important for everyone to remember, and it's that there's no failing. You shouldn't feel bad at any point. There's no failing. If you fail, that's a good thing, because the story will keep going, and the director or the protagonist can come up with what happens next. If you fail, something new can happen. The story will never halt, right? If you fail. So yeah, players can expect stories like a lot of public challenges. So I don't know. Let me try and think of some one shots I've had. Recently, I had a boat race. I remember, that's very recent, and they were all new players. Some who were very used to D&D. but not everybody. So some were a bit more used to improv. But even the person who struggled a bit with improv, they found that this game was easy for them. The scene cues really helped them come up with ideas. And again, if someone gets stuck, the director can definitely help them. Instead of leaving it completely up to them, they can give them like a couple of options of what happens next, that sort of thing. But yeah, expect hijinks. You know, think of British madcap comedies where things go wild. There's no limits to what can happen.
A big part of that comedy is something. I love that you say failing forward. I was going to ask you about it if you didn't bring it up yourself, because it's at the beginning of near the beginning of the book. It talks about that for players, and it's really great guidance. And if you look at a lot of classic British comedies, it is, oh no, something goes wrong. How do we deal with this in a ridiculous way? Comedy ensues. So you almost want it to go wrong, and you're willing it to not go perfectly. So I think that's fantastic advice. You also give a lot of advice for the directors, for the person running the game. Which maybe that's going back to your first Dragon Age experience and not realizing you were like, I should really give them some guidance that I didn't have. So could you talk a little bit about the guidance or the things you'd recommend for somebody if they're picking up this game to run for their friends for the first time?
Well, one thing that is very beautiful that we have nowadays that I didn't have when I was 18, which is you can watch an actual play to start.
Yes, yeah.
Right? So apart from reading the book, especially if you have no idea what a tabletop role-playing game is, I wish that back then I could have just watched an actual play and kind of see what it's all about, see what the vibe is about. Yeah. But advice for directors is definitely plan out your episodes, have kind of a few key moments that you want to happen, but then leave it to the players. So don't plan too much. Have a few moments that you want to happen. So for example, I had that boat race recently, that boat race one shot. I had a few obstacles that I wanted to happen along the boat race. So there were some rabid ducks at some point. I knew I wanted that. I knew I wanted at some point someone tried the rival club. I knew I wanted them to try and steal dog nap, one of the players' dogs. Obstacles like that I planned, but then I left it up to them what they wanted to do with it. Within the book, there is a lot of advice for the director. One of our chapters is just there for ideas for stories, and it's a pretty detailed chapter. So if you aren't sure how to create your own episode or your own season, we have a couple of pre-made campaigns. You can just use pre-made characters and go, and we've kind of structured every single episode. We also have 70 story hooks in the book, which is a lot. You will never be short of ideas. And story hooks are just kind of a few lines of ideas they're especially really good for one shots, but even you can fit them in throughout a campaign. There's a sandbox setting as well. It's called the Brabble Manor, like a country house estate. There's NPCs outlined and there's a map with the house and everything. So there is a lot of tools for the director already in the book.
Perfect.
And ideas on how to create your own season as well.
Wonderful. And I know another question I sometimes have is, because doing a comedy role-playing game, if you're looking to run a game, I think sometimes people have a bit of anxiety around, oh, what if I'm not funny enough? So what guidance do you have for perhaps narrators and players about, creating a comedy campaign and how to create that environment if they're feeling a bit nervous of, oh, I don't know if I'm funny and can perform in that way?
Well, firstly, look, not everyone is going to be funny necessarily, but I think everyone can create funny scenarios. So to start with, the scene cues are going to help you a lot, I think, to create funny scenarios. But if you're not sure if you can be funny, I'd say, create a character that you definitely know you can do. Like for me and for a lot of people, what works is creating a character that's very over the top. right? So we're not Flabbergasted is not here to create like small nuanced characters, be over the top. Like for me,
Yeah.
I don't know why in every single game I'm always an old lady aristocrat. I don't know why. That's what I like to play,
That
and
appeals
that's
to me as well. When I was reading this, I was like,
that's
this is
how
what I
I'm
want to
funny.
be. Yes. Yeah.
Just very Downton Abbey.
Mm-hmm.
Just an old lady aristocrat. So pick something that you know you can be funny with, and if you're not, it's not the end of the world. It won't halt gameplay because there's going to be funny there's going to be funny scenarios.
Okay, fantastic. So another kind of question I had as well is talking about. Oh my gosh, I lost my question. I had it written down and everything. So, if people are interested in the book and after you talked about it, where's the best place for them to kind of find out more or pick up a copy?
Yeah, you can go on our website, wanderers-tome.com. You can buy our game there. You can learn more about the game. And also over there, you can find all our socials, and there are more photos and videos there as well. Yeah, if you want to learn more, I would also suggest YouTube. Look up actual plays. There are some really good ones. Some really good podcast actual plays as well that people have done. So I think that will help you kind of get the feel of Flabbergasted.
Definitely, for sure. Thank you so much for coming on and talking about Flabbergasted. Is there anything else you want to kind of share about the book or talk about, like any points we haven't had the chance to touch upon, or some questions that I should have asked you about?
No, your questions were all great.
Thank you.
I will say if you want to try out Flabbergasted, I mentioned you can go on our website, but on our website we have a quick start guide. That's going to be really great if you want to just try it out for yourself. It's like a 30-page guide that will kind of get you started to you can create a one shot with it and see if it works for you and your group. Yeah, I think it's very different. It's definitely a unique game and different to. There's nothing out there that's quite like it. So, and it's really good for new players. Great for one shots. I've hosted many public one shots, and it takes like 10 minutes to create to explain the rules and create characters. It's very, very quick. So if that appeals to you, and if the setting appeals to you, I hope you consider trying it out.
Perfect. Sounds great.
That's mostly it.
And links to everything there is in the show notes if you're listening to the podcast. And if you're watching live, they are in the chat for you to link through to. So, Chelsea, I do have one final question for you, which I ask everybody. And it's, do you have any other recommendations for other role-playing games? And the rules are, it can't be a game that you've made, because we've just been talking about Flabbergasted, and it can't be D&D because we're called Not D&D. So any other RPGs that you would like to give a shout out to?
Well, this year I picked up and I tried out Brindlewood Bay, which is another game that was Annie nominated. I believe it won an Annie, I think. Best ebook. That's a really cute game. The theme spoke to me
because you get to play an old lady.
Yep, and a cozy mystery and cozy mysteries. Oh, yeah. Playing an old lady does appeal to me. I've been reading and lots of cozy mysteries recently, and as soon as that came out, I'm like, yes, buy. And it's a very rules light game as well. It's very fun. So I'd like to mention that I have another game that I haven't played yet, but it's next on my to buy list. It was another Annie nominated game. It's called Slug Blaster. I really want to get that next.
I don't know about this. What's the game about?
Let me look at let me look it up and read. It's wild. It's a wild game. So It's called Slug Blaster, Kickflip over a Quantum Centipede.
Fantastic.
It's a tabletop RPG about teenagehood, giant bugs, circuit bent ray guns, and trying to be cool.
Okay, that does sound really good.
Yeah, and there's a Backer Kit campaign coming out very, very soon, so hopefully that's when I'll pick it up. So I just wanted to
Sounds
shout it out
good.
because they were Any nominated, and yeah. Any
Maybe I'll have
nominees
to get
have to
them
stick
on to
together.
talk about that, because I immediately, even just after hearing that short intro, have so many questions. So I think I might have to ask them to come on
I know.
here, because I feel like I could talk about that. But for this week, I think we are coming to a close on our time. So Chelsea, thank you so much for coming on and talking about your game and sharing it with us. If you have any other games coming in the future, we'd love to have you back on to talk about them as well, with
Thank
maybe
you.
Fleur as well. But yeah, and if you've been watching, thank you so much for coming along. And if you're listening, thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with Not D&D. We'll be talking to the creators of Coyote and Crow. So come same time, same place next week. See you there. Thank you very much all. Bye.